University and the Office of Minority Affairs. It is 4 o'clock, and we are ready to begin the program. Cornell West has been detained, but he will be here, and we will have a dialogue to go on. But we will continue with our program. With as many people that are here, and I see that Dale's here now, so Professor West is here.
Thank you.
We'll give him a few minutes to come in. While we're waiting for Professor West, we're going to make a few announcements.
What's up, African people? What's up, everybody else?
Is Alexander in the house? He's going to get ready to do our libation. But before he does our libation, I'm going to tell you how the sequence is going to go. From that point, we're going to move on because you're here to hear our scholars speak. You might ask why the Frank W. Hale Black Culture Center to have a dialogue. Why? Because our students asked for it. They wanted to have a dialogue in a building that has significant history to them, so therefore our scholars will have significant history as far as the dialogue is concerned. So we're very, very proud of our students. The dialogue will be in here as it is going on right now. It could have been any place else, but we felt more comfortable having it in our own building. So we're very proud of that. From that point, we're going to turn over to libation for Alexander Adudra, and then we're going to have our Vice Provost for Minority Affairs, Professor Libor Cornell, do our welcome and some awards. Thank you, Larry, and good afternoon, everybody. Since we have elders in here, I would like to ask permission for my elders to call libation. And I also like everybody to stand up so that we can call libation. I'm just going to pour libation in an indigenous African language. After that, I will explain it in English for you to know what I actually say. And this language is an Akan language, which is free from Ghana. And after that, I will explain in English. Uchedi for Kwame and son. Asasiya and son. Bibrimun Saman 4 and son. Henrik Clarke in Saman 4 and son. Cornell West in Saman 4 and son. And then Yeshim say Yadinim 4, Penny 4, you know when Tem, everything Kitaho. And Kitahu and Yatokwa, Nemum, a Yadishia, and son. Yes, sir, sir, over why and I'm in Napa. Nakitahu Yedi, Emra and Pastor, Emma Nipa, Asia, or Diamuna. Yes, sir, Muslim with Jay Church in Yapa. Never be a year or them be a so rampant on mine. And it's your 4 and a shower. One open PhDs, my own. One open masters, my own. One open BA, my own. One open Kuru, my own. One open my own. One open Mama own. Yes, sir, one open Asam so. And after one open Picasso, my own. You're tired yet? Or die, man, I'm sorry. Put it. This is exactly what I said. I said, Ochedia for Kwame, which is Almighty God, and we call him Kwame because we believe he was born on Saturday. And I said Asasiya, which is Mother Earth, and I believe she's a female, so, and Thursday born, so she's here. And I called all our ancestors to be present, and I called the ancestors of Professor Henrik Clarke, our elder, and I called the ancestors of Cornell West. And I asked their permission for our gathering to be fruitful, not to quarrel, but to learn from our brilliance. And also, this dialogue is fruitful for everybody in here. Since we are all students and still learning, I also ask those who want PhDs to receive it. Those who want PhDs. I also ask, since we are all growing, and since we have
young people in here, those who want husbands should get one. Those who want wives should get one. Those who want kids should get one. Those who want money should get one. Those who want employment should get one. And I also ask those who like us to be successful. And those who don't like us, they don't know where from their sleep.
It's my pleasure once again to welcome all of you here to the Frank W. Hale Black Cultural Center for a dialogue, for discussion, for an opportunity for us to learn. Before we begin our dialogue, it is my pleasure to present a couple of awards. The first award that I would like to present is to Professor Cornell West. Professor West, I'd like to present you with this plaque. The plaque reads as follows: Scholastic Achievement Award, presented to Professor Cornell West in recognition of your valuable contribution to the ongoing dialogue about the African American experience. The Ohio State University Office of Minority Affairs, Frank W. Hale Jr. Black Cultural Center. I have another one. I would like to present this award to Elder Dr. John Henrik Clarke for Outstanding African-Centered Scholarship Award, presented to Elder Dr. John Henrik Clarke in recognition of your priceless contribution to the field of African studies and your unwavering advocacy of the African World Liberation Movement. The Ohio State University Office of Minority Affairs, Frank W. Hale Jr. Black Cultural Center. One other award presentation I'd like to make at this point. In the tradition of honoring our elders, we would like to, I'd like to at this point call Aya Gubara to present to Elder John Clarke a kente cloth, and to drape him with kente cloth in recognition of our respect for him as our elder and our teacher. Aya.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Since we understand that there can be no female without male and vice versa,
Right.
I can't do this job on my own, so I'm calling on Brother Ambakisye-Okang to please assist me in doing this. Dr. Clarke, I know that since you arrived yesterday, we've been telling you how much you mean to us and how much your works, your writings, your words, how much they've inspired us, how you have set an example for the rest of us to follow. And listening to you last night, speaking without notes, taking us from way back in Kemet to the present, covering every aspect of our history. Those of us who were in that room were very humbled, because when we feel that we're smart because we've gotten an A after seeing what you did yesterday, we know that we haven't even started, we haven't even scratched the surface.
That's right.
It's not very often that people like you come around. If it was often, black people would not be in this place. That's right. You're not as wealthy or as popular as you could have been if you decided to go a different route. That's right. But you've always stood for truth. You've always told us our truth, which is something that a lot of our elders don't tell us.
Right.
And you've always been there to encourage us and to tell us that we have it in us to make a change. We have it in us to liberate ourselves. And that it's something that we must do and we must start doing today. And personally, just having been around you these couple of days has been very rewarding. I haven't asked you a lot of questions because I just wanted to hear you talk about anything and just soak up your knowledge and your energy and everything that moves you and to feel your spirit. And I just want to thank you for being as open, as loving, and being the great master teacher that you are. Not also recognize someone who's been very instrumental in assisting Dr. Clarke. Some of you might be aware that he has lost his sight because he read so much. She's been unwavering in her support. She's been there every step of the way, at least that I've seen. And we would also like to recognize Ms. Sybil Williams and also ask her to come up so that we can also respect her and drape her.
All right. Let's come to this. This is a historic moment. This is a historic moment because this is not a dialogue between minor figures on the African intellectual landscape, not of the past decade or generation, but of the past century, not of the past century, but this is a dialogue between African intellectuals who are giants in their own right since our forced departure from our home. And with that, what I want to do is, first, I guess, set the ground rules if they're agreeable to the gentlemen. I have your permission, Elder, to continue, I take it. Yes, sir. Dr. West, ready to go? All right. And in the words of Dr. West, or Patricia Williams, and I think it was the Village Voice Literary Supplement, October 1992, there's going to be no voyeurism here. We're at home.
This isn't Rashawn. This isn't any place else where they're non-African. This is a family discussion. We want to engage in a full and frank critical dialogue. With that in mind, let's sit down and listen, because Dr. Ambakisye said, let's be frank. Come on, the ground rule. We'll have opening statements, Dr. Clarke, Dr. West, briefly, and then I have several questions that I prepared, and then we're going to open up for the crowd. So my name is Henrik Clarke. Graduate of Tennessee State University. I did come through here, but Tennessee State's the only one I claim because it's a black college. Late, on the executive committee of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization, so that lets me know that you right there, I'm a cultural nationalist, so maybe kind of rough, right? It's going to be all right. Doc, look, no, he's been engaged with the best. I'm in Temple, but I'm not an Asante Temple. So we're gonna work like that. You understand? No liberal integration is needed. It's critical. And in all fairness, now, I want y'all to know why they, one of the reasons they asked me to come and moderate this debate. Because in addition to sitting at the feet of Elder John Henrik Clarke for a few years, critical, the ethical dimensions of Marxist thought, American invasion of philosophy, genealogy of pragmatism, both the new volumes that you had, including Keeping Faith, all that stuff been read, and I ain't saying I understood it all, but I was working with it. So all right. Ground rules. As I said, Dr. Clarke, Elder, if you want to proceed, and then Professor West, and then I'll come back to the mic, and we'll start stripping and see what's there.
Just so Professor West will know what I said in addressing myself to the subject, who speaks for Africa in the New World Order, I talked away from the subject in order to get to the subject, because no one speaks for Africa in the New World Order, and there has been a conscious effort to make sure that Africa has no voice in the new power arrangement of the world. I dealt with the why of it all, and to deal with the why of it all, I had to deal with the power temperament of Europe, starting with the Punic Wars, and when Europe had an opportunity to share the power and the trade of the Mediterranean, and expressed its temperament and wanting to take it all.
That's right.
This idea of wanting to take it all in the European temperament has not changed in over 2,000 years.
That's right.
Today, the power arrangement in the world is an arrangement by which Europe will dominate the major resources of the world. And I explained the progression from the Roman domination in North Africa to the Roman killing early Christians, to the Roman adopting Christianity for political reasons. And I explained that the Europeans adopted Christianity for political reasons, and he still holds on to it for political reasons.
That's right.
Spiritually, Christianity never touched his soul at all, because he could not afford to live by it with the present power arrangement. After he had disgraced himself with the mismanagement of this religion, the camel boy began to struggle. This camel boy asked for reform. And had he gotten reform, there would have been a new religious arrangement in the world based on reform. But failing to get reform, he asked for a new religion. This new religion was Islam. The Africans thinking that by joining Islam, they would get the Romans off of their back, and they were right, they did. But the Arabs replaced the Romans on their back. I explained the African political and cultural naivete going back 3,000 years.
Well,
But now, with the decline of the second golden age in Egypt, with the rise of Islam, a third golden age in the inner West Africa, called the Western Sudan, began to develop with independent African states such as Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. And while the Arabs and the Africans pushed the European back into Europe, Europe eventually began to rise again during the Crusades, another form of European fakery. It had nothing to do with spirituality. And after the drain on that treasure, the Crusades, then the drain on that treasure with the famines and plagues, then they discovered information preserved by the Africans at the University of Salamanca in Spain. And they discovered longitude and latitude again and learned how to put ships at sea again. And once they put ships at sea again, they searched for spices and sweets of Asia, but discovered Africa en route and started the slave trade. And then, starting the slave trade, they needed a rationale for what they had to do to the Africans or wanted to do. So the Pope, in an argument between Spain and Portugal, said, you are both authorized to reduce to servitude all infidel people.
That's right.
They declared the African an infidel, outside of humanity, outside of consideration. Dehumanized him, therefore clearing their conscience for the slave trade.
That's right.
They did not want part of Africa. They wanted it all.
go ahead.
Now, the scattering of the Africans throughout the so-called New World, the development of the plantation system in the Americas, in the Caribbean islands, Africa was without spokesman, and I dealt with that. 19th century, when in the Caribbean islands, and the free man in the Caribbean islands, the free man in America, with Frederick Douglass and Highland Garnett, Samuel Raymond Ward, dynamic ministers of the first half of the 19th century, the first half of the 19th century in the Caribbean islands, and in Brazil, where the Africans had revolted and brought into being 2 states, Palmeiras, Bahia, that now we see Africans away from home trying to establish their own new world order. And this went on until throughout the end of the 19th century, the establishment of independent black churches, independent black institutions, the Africans fighting colonial wars to restore their country. So collectively throughout the African world, the Africans were making a statement about a new world order. And that new world order was predicated on the concept of the restoration of his nationhood and his manhood and womanhood. So in the United States, that also brought into being the Negro Convention movements, the Amina conferences. We are the meetingest organization in this people. All the people. Organized around almost anything. But we came into the 20th century with great voices trying to bring about a new world order for African people, and that is to put African peoples together after that Holocaust. And putting them together, we started an argument that needed not to be an argument at all, whether we should follow Du Bois, whether we should follow Booker T. Washington, and we forgot that both of them were right.
That's right. Yeah.
Both of them were right in different ways, given their time, given the environment that produced them. So in the middle of the 20th century, with the civil rights movement began to develop, the rise of Martin Luther King, the rise of the African independent explosion, with the aftermath of the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester, England, 1945, is planned the African freedom explosion. Africans had begun now to assert themselves for an African world order. They were not asking, as Du Bois and others had asked previously, let us have the kind of education that will equip us for independence. They were saying now, we've got that kind of education. We want it now.
Teach.
This ultimately led to the independence of Ghana. The whites got frightened because they couldn't control the mental wealth of Africa. That was the basic wealth holding up Western economy.
That's right.
So they had to start destroying African nations one after one, beginning with the instigation to destroy Nkrumah, Lumumba, and from the top of North Africa, they had to destroy Arab Pan-Africanists like Ben Bella and Nasser.
Yeah.
Until today, you don't have a single Pan-African head of state any place in Africa. You don't have a single African head of state running an African nation in an African manner. You don't have a single African who would dare to worship an African traditional God in public. They have African bodies and European minds.
That's right.
The idea was to express the need now to study those giants of the 19th century who did express the desire for an African world order based on African values, not European values and European needs, and to seriously study whether Europe is worth following, inasmuch as Europeans are now turning on Europeans.
Right.
And I asked them to seriously study a political opportunist and a Johnny-come-lately called Karl Marx. And I suggested there might be some division between the Karl Marxists and the Groucho Marxists. And there's nothing that no one has ever planned our destiny, and any people who think another people will plan their road to power are fools.
Yes, sir. Yes, right.
Because no one has a vested interest in planning the liberation of another people if by being liberated they gain control of the wealth-producing resources of their country that they, other people, formerly control. This, in essence, is what I was trying to get across. That freedom is something you take with your own hands.
Teach, brother.
You control it.
That's right.
With your own hands.
That's right, brother.
You do not leave to other people alliances.
That's right.
You first make an alliance with yourself. With other people, you make it based on what is convenient. And when it fails to work for you, you break it. Because it no longer works for you.
Teach, brother.
I said we have to introduce our people to reality. Oppression has taught us to live in a world of sick political fantasy. We have to come out of it and face reality.
That's
This,
right.
in essence, is what I was trying to get at.
I just wanted to say before you begin that since this is a family meeting, and I know you come up from the church tradition, so you know it's all in love. All right? No, I'm serious. I mean, because you may have misinterpreted earlier.
Yeah, no.
This is a love thing.
I see the love, though, brother. I'm serious about that. That's the truth. Well, let me first say that I would just like to thank those who had the vision and determination to bring all of us together, because it is an honor to be in the presence of Professor John Henrik Clarke. I would not be sitting here if it was not for John Henrik Clarke. He has been a long distance runner in the struggle for peace. He has a fundamental commitment to the life of the mind and fuses it to the struggle for freedom of African people. Right. I've been reading John Henrik Clarke in Freedom Ways in the 1940s. And his book on Malcolm X and the text on Marcus Garvey. I still read him in the City Sun, which is a black newspaper in Brooklyn, on Africa and the New World Order. And of course, he recalls the wonderful time we had in Columbia when we sat at his feet. We had a citywide seminar. You remember that, Professor Clarke?
Yeah.
Now, I was then an assistant professor, 23 years old, sitting at the feet of Professor John Henrik Clarke at Columbia University. He would come across town to teach at night at Columbia. And the dialogue that we had, the engagements that we had was very, very real. So I just want to say that it's a blessing to be in his presence and to know, in fact, that we have such firm shoulders upon which to stand as he indeed slowly passes the baton, not to one person, but to each and every one of us to empower ourselves intellectually, spiritually, politically, and so forth. Like each and every one of you, I could sit here and listen to him all day and all night. Because his encyclopedic mind is one that's able to not just put forward facts, but most importantly, to put forward a global framework, that sense of history that I was suggesting briefly this afternoon. It's true, most of my own work has tended to focus on a particular slice of the human history. Professor Clarke talks about the grand scope of human history going back to the beginning of the human adventure in the Nile Valley. That takes tremendous interdisciplinary work and discipline. I tend to be much more limited. I talk primarily about the modern period. That is to say, the period in which black folk began to get caught up within the whirlwind of white supremacy. And I talked this afternoon about white supremacy itself being a construct put forward within the age of Europe and the degree to which the Atlantic slave trade sits at the very center of that age, 1492 to 1945. The attempt of those nations between the Ural Mountains and the Atlantic Ocean to shape the world in their own image. The attempt to Europeanize the whole globe, not just Africa, but Asia as well, Indian brothers and sisters, Indochina, Latin America as well. The breakthroughs in military technology and oceanic transportation and nation-state consolidation, all as a part of ensuring a particular part of the world as the imperial center, the metropole, as it were, and hence imperialism and colonialism linked to white supremacy and the subjugation of peoples of color being so fundamental for this period. So that my scope is much, much more limited than that of Professor Clarke's. Secondly, I tend to highlight the decolonization process, so that, for example, Professor Clarke can talk about the various rises of Europe and the various rises of Africa, going back to the great ancient African civilizations, and then the decolonization process in the forms of resistance for independence from European colonialism, especially culminating in the 1950s and 60s. But again, I would want to argue we must think globally. That is to say, when we talk about decolonization, we're not just talking about Africa, we're talking about India 1947 and China 1949, and a whole host of other efforts of other brothers and sisters around the world responding to Europeanization of the world. And most of my work has been on the third, not just the age of Europe ending in 45 with the mushroom clouds over Nagasaki and Hiroshima and the concentration camps
in Europe itself. Europe, a devastated and divided continent, now dependent on the United States and the Soviet Union. And not only the decolonization process that Professor Clarke alluded to earlier, the Chilamumbas and Nkrumahs and Tourés and others, but the degree to which the USA moves to the center of the historical stage after 1945. And like Europe, attempts to engage in the Americanization of the world. The age of globalization with transnational corporations, IMF, World Bank, creating a global workplace and a global financial network and a global cultural bazaar centered in that entertainment information supergiant called the USA, but connected to other powers, Japan, Britain, Germany, and so on. And the question then becomes, well, what in fact do African peoples in different places, Brazil, Jamaica, Ethiopia, Harlem, south side of Chicago, do in light of this context? And that, of course, is the fundamental challenge for me. And I think what's probably most controversial, I just love the brother introducing this, the issue, is that for me, you see, I'm one who tries to take seriously the prophetic elements within the African Christian tradition, because it was in fact the black church that served as a major institutional response to the absurd that African people had to come to terms with. And it was an Africanization of that Christianity, no doubt. But it had elements that warrant serious criticism, but it also had ways of preserving black humanity. I talked this afternoon a bit about those guttural cries and wrenching moans and visceral groans that are still at work within black music today. So it's very difficult to overlook the degree to which the black religious tradition and all of its complexity was a crucible by which black folk could preserve sanity. And I still build in part on that tradition, especially with the musical component of that tradition. And at the same time, I talk seriously about radical democracy. And I think it's probably here where I have my fascinating exchanges with my cultural nationalist brothers and sisters and black nationalist brothers and sisters. Because there's a sense in which, for me, coming out of the black Christian tradition that tries to keep hold of the humanity of other folk, that I want to ensure that we do not in any way mirror the kind of hatred and bigotry that has been directed at us, even as we attempt to come up with effective strategies for struggle. I agree with Professor Clarke when he says that we can't engage in milquetoast alliances with other folk without coming together and having strength when one goes into an alliance. That's one of the reasons why the summit was so very important, and you all know the crucial role that Professor Henrik Clarke played in Chicago in the summit that Ben Chavis and Ms. Louis Farrakhan and a host of others were a part of, attempting to ensure that there's a black strength so that we can treat each other with respect and take each other seriously even as we disagree, because we're trying to keep the focus on the suffering of people of African descent. It's just, for me, my radical democratic project is one that argues that in the age of globalization, we are ultimately going to have to coalesce with other folk who don't look like us if we're going to alleviate that deep suffering. But that's under a certain set of conditions. Not to be manipulated or played on, but to feel as if the powers at the present time, corporate elites, bank elites with their political elites, cannot be broke with folk by themselves, based solely on color. That's why Brazil, links between Brazil, South Africa, I'm going to South Africa tomorrow, I'm going home to Ethiopia on Monday, can't wait. The links between Brazil, South Africa, Ethiopia, these are fundamental. But it's going to be alliances that are both African people as well as non-African people. Let me stop there, because I know we want dialogue, and I want to hear as much as I can from Professor Clarke as well.
All right, thanks, Professor Clarke. Thank you so much. I have questions directed to each one of those, but let me see if I can ask one and then get your response and then get Professor Clarke's response kind of tied together. This is a question I've been asking myself for a long time after engaged your work. Let me preface it by saying that Sheikh Anta argues that there must be three things for African people in order for us to galvanize the people. First, the historical continuity, which means classical Africa up through the present moment, which in turn, for Sheikh Anta generates a historical consciousness, which in turn gives us a sense of purpose for the future. That's basically putting it. And of course, you know, Sheikh Anta himself rooted in a lot of Marxist thought. With that in mind, you have talked about your location as prophetic black Christian, a radical Democrat, and working with in the best of those traditions. From a historical perspective, when we think about the historical continuity of African spirituality, beginning in the Nile Valley with Ma'ati and ethics spreading through Central and West Africa and so forth, this whole notion of xenophilia, welcoming strangers and humanizing in and of itself, how do you reconcile the strict cosmological and axiological context out of which African spirituality emerges, the strict belief system that wouldn't dehumanize anybody, with the principles of radical democracy, particularly when you fuse them with the pragmatism, which, according to some people's argument, doesn't believe in the unifying principles of the world. In other words, how can you be an African Christian and a Marxist at the same time?
Yeah,
and then Dr. Clarke.
Appreciate that, yeah, appreciate that question. I mean, one is, I'm not a Marxist in the sense that...
Radical Democrat, I'm sorry.
Yeah, radical Democrat. I mean, I think Professor Clarke is right that Marx is a particular extension of the European Enlightenment that has no sense of the depth of spirituality. You see, it's impossible for me to grow up in the Black Baptist Church as Holy Ghost Baptist and not have appreciation of the depth and complexity of spirituality.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Marx himself didn't understand that, but that's his deficiency. What he did highlight is the concentration of wealth within monopolies and oligopolies. He's right about that. What he did highlight was during the age of Europeanization, the global system would be unable to produce enough quality jobs with a living wage such that everyday people would have to deal with mass unemployment and underemployment. All you got to do is look at chocolate cities to see that. So those are insights that anyone who is involved in struggle for freedom would appropriate. I learned that from Professor John Henrik Clarke, right in Freedom Way. He's been deeply conversant with the Marxist tradition, but always from an African-centered perspective. So he's appropriating the insights that relate to African suffering. I agree wholeheartedly. The difference is this, though, you see, that I am very suspicious of the language that talks about African X and African Y. It's too monolithic. It's too much of a generalization. That Africa itself is such a diverse place, 4 times the size of America. Rich history, all kinds of different streams and strands, all of them not agreeing. We could highlight certain similarities, but the vast diversity and variety of African cultures is such that when I hear something like African spirituality or African values or African zeal, I say, well, yes and no. What do we mean? Let's be historical concrete and specific here. And of course, that's what we're going to do today. Very historical concrete and specific. But I just want to throw that out so we can move in that direction.
I think we must realize the European personality and his cultist desire for power walks his personality to the point where the real practice of Christianity and democracy is alien to that personality. When you look at African societies, before the interference by the European and the Arabs, there are faults, of course. But look at the fact that African societies had no word for jail because no one had ever gone to one.
Yeah, that's right.
had no social agency such as insane asylums because no one had ever gone crazy. There was some humanity in African societies that prevailed within the society itself, and that emanated from the structure of the family. It had built-in judge and jury. I was reluctant to come to the conclusion because I have such a love for all the people on this earth, had. It was hard for me to arrive at the conclusion that there are some people who are evil and not going to ever change.
That's right. That's right.
I have met some white people as good as people need to be. And I don't think we should waste our time thinking we got to fight every single white person on the face of the earth, because some of them are frightened and some of them are exploited too. I think all exploited people should come together and do their exploiter in. But it's not just a black and white thing all the way. It might well be based on a vague concept of class. And if you read Sheikh Anta Diop's The Cultural Unity of Africa,
That's right.
he never said that all Africans were the same. But he said there's a strain running through Africa that gives Africa a kind of unifying development in spite of the diversity and the difference between one part of Africa and tried to do me harm, and they thought I'm more valuable to them alive. So they asked me for my own safety, don't come. And I respected that. But I think Africa is hooked into Western Christianity, and Western Christianity is a myth because the Western man is incapable of being a Christian. I haven't met him. Teach, brother! And remember now, slavery was brought into being by Christians. Read the Capitalism and Slavery, read the first 3 chapters. How the church sanctified and sanctioned the slave trade. Read the book called Catholicism and Slavery.
Right.
Read Basil Davison's work, Black Mother, the Slave Trade, and if you forgive the modesty. Read my book, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. And I have another book, Slavery and the Slave Trade, that I'm revising. I've probably done 4 books on slavery.
Professor Clarke, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. More respect, you know, brother, seriously. One is, you would agree that there were some prophetic Christians who played a role in resisting modern slavery?
Yes, some. And, some of the abolitionists were hustling on our misery, including especially the British abolitionists. I think Clarkson was real, but Wilberforce was a phony. Some of the others. I agree that some.
Right, but John Brown was for real.
John Brown was for real, but I don't know why even you would neglect Shields Green and John Brown's black lieutenants.
Yeah, true.
In favor of some minor characters that did not play any major role in the John Brown affair at Harper's Ferry. Shields Green left Douglas, and
That's right.
so I think I joined the old man.
That's right. But how would you define your relationship to what I'm calling radical democracy, because there's a sense in which I'm building on elements of your earlier work, and I want to know now, later, how you define your sophisticated Pan-African view of the world with radical democracy.
But that kept me in trouble all the time because I had a 50-year direct relationship to the American Communist Party.
Right.
I would not let them take away my African partiality, my nationalism, and I would not let them stop me from criticizing them for their contradictions. Until finally they drove me out of the association of the party. I was never a member of the party, and yet I was closer related than many members and had more confidential information than most members, but I was never actually a member of the party. Briefly, I was a member of the Young Communist League on the Lower East Side, but I read more and did more work and defended the right of the party to exist and traveled in Russia several times, and I think the experiment in communism deserves a fair chance to exist. I think the Russians made a mess out of it and turned to capitalism. And Russia, in spite of its pretended fight against imperialism, Russia was an imperial nation, but its empire was in Europe, mostly. 40% of Russia is Oriental, and most of them are Muslim, and didn't plan to change. It was stupid to declare a nation atheistic, officially an atheist nation. Now, I think all organized religion, male chauvinist murder cults.
That's right.
I'm a strong spiritual human being because all organized religion has let itself be used by foreigners, fakers, and fools to enslave people. And I say this is irreligious to let religions do an ungodly thing.
That's right.
But I don't think, had Russia had the intelligence of letting these different outlying colonies keep their religion and their culture, they would have objected less to Marxism. And Russia could have kept her empire had she not tried to impose a monolithic communism on all the people within the empire, especially the Oriental section to the south. Russia is now doing what she was criticizing England and the United States and the imperial powers for doing. Literally killing our own people. There was some discrimination in Russia against Africans, and many Africans taking Russian women home was found dead on snow piles in Russia. Because, you know, we're sweet talkers wherever we go.
That's right.
I was at a hotel in Russia. All the Russian men, this girl was a former ballet dancer. She hurt her leg, so she was now having a newsstand. And all the Russian men was coming there talking to her and talking. She couldn't see them for nothing. And how this African get this barber in Russia, I don't know. So his barber was parked outside, and he got sweet talking to this Russian girl, and she closed that newsstand and was gone with him, gone. Brother, I don't know what you said. Some of these Africans, a little too bold for some of these Russians, and not discreet at all. And so that wasn't appreciated. I've seen them walk by the Lumumba University and call that the zoo. So Russia was not without discrimination. As for whether Russia was anti-Semitic, I don't even know what a Semitic is, and I don't think the Jews know it either.
You know when y'all want to come down, he knows a lot of folks who call themselves Jews. But let me ask this question now, because I think it's an important point in relation, especially to the young people here, that there's a sense in which the road that Professor John Henrik Clarke has traveled has been one of profound intellectual engagement with traditions like Marxism, communism, critiques of capitalism, radical democracies, exchanges with Paul Robeson and Du Bois and others. And why do I say that? Because I think there's, at times, you all correct me if I'm wrong, there's a tendency to relate to his particular nationalist dimension and not recognize from whence it comes. He is not a garden variety nationalist who has not grappled over his life with capitalism, communism, issues of class, patriarchy, gender, and so on. And so it's very easy at times for folks to invoke John Henrik Clarke because he is so rightfully well respected, but not understand the fire, the brook of fire through which he had to pass as a serious intellectual freedom fighter who engaged Marx and Engels and Lenin and right on across the board, as well as the radical democratic tradition. Is that a fair characterization, Mr. Clarke?
That's fair, but remember,
Yeah.
I was born in Union Springs, Alabama, son of a sharecropper. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia, where my father worked in the brickyard or fertilizer company. He made $12, $15 a week. In 1 week, he made $18. And being his oldest son, I had to count the money. Then he would lecture me on perseverance. How, look what you can do in this country, boy, if you work hard. $18 in 1 week. Now, you know, you tipped the head waiter more than that. One night out, you tipped the waiter more than that.
That's true.
I mean, so the idea of working hard, most of the people got the money in this country don't work hard. Some of them don't work at all. That's right. All right, I grew up in, I left home because I couldn't stand my stepmother when I was 14. I lived in a boarding house. That was another kind of house. So I got all kind of experiences of poor people, with poor people. There's an imbalance in the society. I see too many people who don't work at all with a whole lot, and too many people who work like hell and ain't got nothing. Communism offered me a place to examine the society, to see what was wrong. I examined the society, found some things wrong, but I wasn't, what communism failed to understand, it gave me the capacity to examine them too. And I did. And subsequently was thrown out. I'm a nationalist, and I'm unapologetic about it. I've associated with all kinds of people, and I've loved all kinds of people, and I've appreciated the help of all kinds of people. But first and foremost and above all things, I'm devoted to the ultimate liberation of my own people.
That's right.
And that raises a question of peoplehood versus nationhood. Because you see, I believe that people of African descent are distinct people and an extension of African people. And one can believe in distinct peoplehood and not infer that what follows from that is nationhood talk.
But look, you wouldn't say that to an Israeli.
I do.
No, we go ahead. We got good time.
Oh, we got good time?
But, you know, I think that's very important.
Everybody in the world looks to a historical place of origin.
That's right. Well,
Why are we questioned when we look back?
yes. That's right. Yes.
Blacks tell you how you look, but don't tell you who you are. Every people on this earth, when you dress them by their proper name, that name must reflect land, history, and culture.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. And you call them out of their name. There's no black land or black Blackville. That's a color designation, it's not a land designation.
Right.
Why are we the only people deprived of a land designation? Italians can be in America for 5 generations and never go to Italy. Ask them who is. I say, I'm Italian.
That's right.
You don't say you say he's Italian American. He said, I'm Italian. German, same thing. I'm German. And yet we are shy of saying, I'm an Arab. I've been here quite a while, but I'm in exile, but I'm an Arab.
Go ahead.
See, I don't think nothing wrong with calling ourselves African. And one, see, Germany didn't have a Germany until 1870, didn't have Italy until 1867, so those folks who came from Sicily, for example, they got to Boston, they said they were Italian, they said they were Sicilian, because there's no such thing as Italy before that time. That these are shifting constructs.
These Sicilians who are mixed black.
Right. That's right. That's right.
That's what started the mafia. The lighter skinned ones discriminating against the darker skinned ones. And so they started an organization to protect themselves. We need to do the same.
Could I just one more question?
Oh, sure, but I just want to interject on your work while you sure. In Keeping Faith, I believe in the introduction, you talk about the spiritual trip home to Ethiopia with your wife, and you discuss your increasing interest in that African tradition, your home, your second home. Right. You also discuss your increasing distress at the thought of the possibilities of transforming the hedonistic culture, just to quote, and market-driven society of America, of this country, and your possible openness to one day shifting terrains to your home in Ethiopia. I remember reading Horace Keaton's Long Old Road, where he talks about being a correspondent at the UN, and a brother from Ghana was there, and he said, I feel sorry for you black Americans. He said, why? He said, because if we succeed in our struggle in Ghana, we'll have a nation. But if you succeed in your struggle, you will disappear. You become an American. With that in mind, my question to you, which I think is in the context of the discussion, what is your vision or dream for the ultimate goal and destinations of Africa away from home in the United States around the diaspora? And what are the lessons that you see as invaluable that we should have learned from being away from home for the long time? And then we can continue.
There's a whole lot on the table. I want to begin, though, where Professor Clarke began, namely being the son of a sharecropper. We're talking about material poverty. And one of the problems, major problems, that African peoples have had when we first arrived in this hemisphere is too much poverty, not enough self-love. The issue of the material poverty and material deprivation cannot be talked about unless you talk about the global distribution of wealth and resources, which takes us right back again to transnational cooperation. Now, the issue of self-love is something else. That's a psychic, spiritual issue that relates to being stolen from Africa. What we have done as a people of Africa African descent has been to make and remake, invent and reinvent ourselves as a particular extension of African people in light of our sojourn here in this strange land. And so when I reflect back on my own identity, for example, when I go to Ethiopia every year and stay for 2.5 months, as much as I love Ethiopia, I still miss the black music that I don't hear there. Because Luther makes a difference. Coltrane makes a difference. Monk makes a difference. There's no monks in Addis Ababa. They got levels of genius expressed in Amharic and Oromo and Tigrian music, but it ain't Coltrane. Now what's going on here? These black people, or these African people, have done something quite unique. This is what I mean by distinct black peoplehood. I'm not talking about nation yet. We can argue about moving from peoplehood to nation. But the same sharecroppers who helped produce this towering figure, you think about that. Right? The same father who he talked about making $18 a week producing this giant. He had to make a contribution at the level of his spirit, and it was more than likely in a church, but we can ask Professor Clarke whether that's the truth or not. It was in some communal bonding that took place that transmitted some kind of value to empower him to look at a communist tradition to bring critique to bear on white supremacy and so forth. That is African people in the New World movement. That's an extension of. It's not discontinuous yet, because we're still dealing with the quest for self-love and self-regard and so forth and so on in light of the white supremacy coming at us, but we did do something new and novel, based on something old and ancient. And it's that dialectic between the two that I'm caught between. That's why I'm going back and forth from Ardent to America, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Yeah. Go ahead, that's
No, I have no self-love problem, and I think this present generation, mostly black youth, and miseducated blacks who are confused have a problem with self-love and self-identity, and they're caught up into what I call the NACP syndrome.
That's right. Be God, brother. Be God.
Get close to white people and soak up something through osmosis. You know, just sit next to them and you'll be better. Ride a bus across town, you'll be better. And just to be with them, be close to them, you're acknowledging the fact that they got something you haven't got, but they don't have anything you can't get. And a lot of these kids in Jim Crow schools excelled and went on to the best schools, but with the introduction of so-called integration of Bag of One,
that's right.
We began to dismantle our stores, little hotels in our communities.
That's right.
They wasn't towering hotels, but they were clean and generally run by a black woman we always called Big Mama. Sometimes you Kellerton and Callaway, who couldn't stay in a white hotel, stayed in those little black hotels. These sisters could put a dish before you to make other people apologize for thinking they could cook. We didn't have to lose all of this for so-called integration. We missed the point. There used to be a black grocery store on every other corner, and you could get a little credit, ain't got no money, you know, he'll wait till Saturday. You get your money. He was part of the community. He belonged to your church, and so he know you ain't going nowhere. He ain't going nowhere. So the teacher, you see, the teacher was a gift in the community. You see the teacher, you talk your little nasty talking, and you see when somebody sits there, shh, that's the teacher. What? Polish your little manners. goes up, you know, teacher come out, you fired. Now you don't show that respect to teachers anymore. Right. The teacher, you dare not. The teacher can go home, she can spank your behind, and go home, and you get another one right in front of her. So if she spanks you, you hope she'd be quiet. So you wouldn't get a second one at home. And you obey too. There was something going family-wise in the community. And I liked the idea of growing up in a community where, though I was poor, I didn't like the idea of being poor, but such that we had was shared. And people had great expectations from you. I carried golf bags and around, of course I lived near Fort Benning, Georgia. Eisenhower was a major and Bradley was a major studying in the infantry school at Fort Benning at the time. I used to carry for Eisenhower, I used to carry for my brother. Never liked Eisenhower, told. But he tipped 15 cents and Bradley tipped a quarter. That made a difference. Lord Collins was the youngest post commander in the army at the time, and he didn't tip anything. But that didn't bother us because his daughter was married to the bakery officer. And she told the girls in the bakery, when the caddies come to the bakery, give them twice. So cinnamon buns was 4 for a nickel. So we can go there with a nickel and get 8 cinnamon buns. And we sell 2 for a nickel on to the guys who didn't have a nickel. So when they made money, they paid back. You know, we did our little loan sharking. So now, I grew up poor. I had a rich background. Lots of hugs and kisses, and because I have such a brilliant memory, anytime they wanted somebody to recite something in church and they want it done well and want it done in a hurry, sometimes within a 3-day period, to learn all those lines, they call on me and I have it ready. And my father was, you know, he'd bring me in to recite, and I never forget it now, but I'd stand there and recite my little verse. Jesus be, may I be like thee, look from heaven and pity me, oh so full of sin I am, though I'm just a little lamb. I'm talking about what do I know about sin?
That's that river that Vincent Hardy's talking about.
That's right.
Just flowing on the unconscious level. 70, 60 years later, he still remembers every word of it. That meant that he had some folk who loved him so deep and affirmed him so much that even as the launching pad that the black church constituted and moved him into cosmopolitan stratospheric space, he could still have those roots. And I tell you, I mean, for me, that's one of the reasons why when I think about Afrocentrism, again, I think about John Coltrane as well as John Henrik Clarke, because you have somebody who has such deep roots in the African practices in the New World, but still is able to branch out and embrace a variety of different traditions and things. But I'm still unclear about why you hold on to the nationalist designation.
I hung on to the national, but it's very natural, very, to hang on to something that you can claim. Europeans have taken away even our right to claim land, to say something is mine to say that this is something I love and this is something I gravitate toward. And nobody called Europeans in any words for loving the country of their birth, loving the people who gave them birth. And we're the only people who attacked along those lines. Nobody has dealt forthrightly with the fact that a European people belatedly converted to the Hebrew faith. All right? Are making claims totally unrelated to them. In the 19th century, you will see Douglas, the radical ministers, you know how they got at Samuel Ringo Ward, the Caribbean free man who make contact with the African American free man. Of course, there's an element in it, but I think the element is somewhat exaggerated. It was never so widespread that it would stop our movement in its tracks. That nihilism might have started much later. And this might be what we're dealing with right now. All right? And if you bring it up front, then it might be more true to the present scene than it was to the 19th century scene. If you read a book called Man of Mark, look at the pictures. That 19th century black man had courage, he even looked courageous. You look at the droopy 20th century black man, he's apologizing for being alive. That's right. I walk part of the way with the definition of nihilism, but if you place it in its proper context, and if you place it in the context of right now where our children, instead of pursuing a career, now killing each other and taking dope, and if you bring it up front, then I would say partially yes. That 19th century needs to be dealt with when we were swinging, we were hitting back at something. One of the great odds producing men and institutions in spite of it. We don't have much to apologize when you think of what we did against those great odds. Producing novelists, producing writers. Out of it would come a Delaney and Robert Campbell. At the end of that century would come Bishop Turner and stuff. Oh no. Face your emphasis some other place, but don't place it back there.
Yeah, we talk about the contemporary situation. Well, we still got a lot of young folks swinging. But what is accented more so is all of us struggling against nihilism. Black folk always struggling against nihilism. But the question is what is coming at one, and the market culture is much more devastating for the contemporary generation. They still fighting back, even if they got to use the market, hip-hop culture, rap music, and so forth. They can use the market as a way of fighting the market. Become businessmen and others bring critique to bear on the white supremacy in business. The problem is that they haven't hit the male supremacy as hard as they have the white supremacy, so we see the misogyny still working. We see the homophobia still working. But I would agree with Professor Clarke that it has to be historically contextualized. And the reason why I simply introduced the term had to do with the contemporary situation in which we see escalating levels of death and disease and destruction that's ravaging certain pockets. And yet that same 19th tradition of strong black men and women coming forward, I think it's still at work among the younger generation. I think the younger generation actually going to probably surprise us in terms of the new waves of social motion that they're going to produce in the next 5 years or so. But that's my hope. That's my hope. Let me just register one deep philosophical point in relation to what Professor Clarke said earlier, though, about evil. Because I really do believe that there's profound potential of evil in each and every one of us. And to that degree, it thoroughly cuts across civilization, time and space and race and class and gender. And it's precisely because of that that I don't give up on folk. That is to say, I don't give up on folk who, even though it looks as if they're involved in a thoroughly devilish behavior. I don't make a political program on it, but I don't give up on them. And this is true even in regard to certain cultural nationalism. You see that? That is also true. I mean, you know, Professor Mhenga, he's undergone some fundamental transformations and metamorphoses after going to captivity and jail and so forth. You see, he's in process just like everybody else. That's the reason why I'm in dialogue with Minister Louis Farrakhan, Al Sharpton, and others, because they human beings who are in process and who are open to being pushed in the same way I need to be pushed.
Right.
And so just from a Christian point of view, I always give folks another chance. That don't mean that you're not critical of what they did, no doubt. But at the same time, folk can surprise you sometimes if you don't give up on them. And this is part of the genius of the Elijah Muhammad.
Teach hard. That's
He
right.
was able to look at folk everybody else that gave up on and said, I can actually provide some new being for you if you get in on the program. Look at Brother Malcolm down there in the cell in Norfolk thinking he ain't worth a dime, still selling drugs on the inside. And Elijah said, no, I'm going to turn you around, little brother.
Indeed, indeed.
Malcolm in process. That doesn't mean that, and I'm not really refuting so much Professor Clarke, but I'm trying to provide a certain framework such that the process of folk can be affirmed even as we tell the truth about them in terms of where they were or where they are.
Teach hard, brother.
Well, my give up patience is a little shorter than Professor West. I mean, I've already given them a chance. And I don't see much in them except another hustle. And Mhenga Karinga, what he went to jail for doing, needs to be explained. He went to jail for mutilating black women. And the women he mutilated were dark complected. The women in his harem, he has a harem, light complected, almost white. So in addition to having an ego problem, you might have a color problem too.
That's right. Come on. Say it. Bring it down. Bring it home.
He speaks well. He performs well. We have to make a distinction between these academic vaudeville shows and people who give us knowledge. We cannot accept a performance as fighting our liberation. We can enjoy a performance, but don't think it moves you forward. It helps the bank account of the performance. So, I really think Karinga is more of a performer than anything. I don't see anything enlightened coming from him. I like Al Sharpton personally because he's something that is useful in history. He's an alarmist.
That's right, brother. That's right.
Alarmist solves no problem. But they call attention to problems in such a way they won't let them leave the agenda until someone else tries to solve it. So they serve a purpose with that big mouth, the articulation.
Yes, sir.
They point to put that fire out, put that, do that one, do that one, do that one, you know. Otherwise you go to sleep on the problem.
Indeed.
But the alarmist won't let you sleep until you do something about it. Give me it all. Give me that. Yeah, $10 here, $10 here. So you don't feel good unless you make some kind of contribution to that little cause. Well, it's kind of a Baptist con game, but I guess it works out.
Well, Baptist, though.
I grew up a Baptist. I was a Baptist Sunday school teacher.
There it is.
And I enjoy the Baptist faith, although I think they're the loudest and the wrongest.
It was Baptists who founded Pentecostalism in Susan Street in Los Angeles. They can make a joyful noise too.
I go home to Georgia. Well, I grew up in Columbus. I go to different my relatives' churches. And last time I went to a church where a Baptist minister was imitating a Baptist minister. He did a little hollering around the pulpit. And he turned around and said, "Did you hear me, church?" He said nothing to hear. Do I have a witness? Witness for what? But I can tell you one thing about the Baptists. They are not dull. Interesting people.
Your people.
We're looking at one of the legatees of that Baptist tradition right here. Not dull at all.
But I can tell you one thing. They can sing.
Hey, that's right.
They can sing.
See, can we keep on that track in terms of discussion of the things that have made African people survive, persevere? Many of the cultural things that both of you have been talking about. Instead of like a, I don't want to say dichotomous kind of exclusion of one tradition for the sake of the other, we want to keep the African tradition that people in this country. It seems that the agreement is clear. That where the disagreement may come in, I mean, we're all trying to figure that out at this point, but I want to ask a question framed in the context of perhaps Marimba Ani and her work, Yurugu, also that serves be on. In terms of the cultural location of African people and their strive, our sense of agency, our sense to survive, our hope, through the encounter with the absurd, at what moment do we lose that sense? Could it perhaps be a moment of cultural connection with a cultural tradition that does not belong to us, and then the extension of that in the future as we deal with nihilism in this era? The question I guess I have is, how do we look toward the future to solve the problems in the African community? And maybe perhaps some of those problems could be solved by dealing with the culture of African people, which seems, at least, I know Dr. Myers was sitting there a minute ago, I guess she had to, I don't know where she went, but she could say a lot better than I could. She's done a lot of work in this field. The African cultural tradition, not a monolith, certainly, a dynamic process, but one with underlying cultural unity. And I'm sure you know you've done the reading about the objectification of human beings, the separation of subject and object we see in European thought, and maybe not seeing that prevalent in African thought. And I can only speak about classical Africa because we learned it in the language. It seems like you can't talk about a culture until you learn the language. So in learning the language of Medu Neter, hieroglyphics, it's clear that many of these concepts we see in Europe, at least through the interpretation that we try to get of Medu Neter, instead of we had to use Gardner and the Europeans at first, but we move beyond that using our dynamic African culture in this context to then analyze the Nile Valley, don't appear. So how do we solve the problems of nihilism with some of the cultural strengths that you've been talking about, both of you gentlemen, because it seems like y'all agreeing on that in terms of African culture being very, very prominent in our solution.
You want to go first, Professor Clarke? I think there's a number of different levels to look at it. I think the important thing to keep in mind that anytime we look at language and cultures, it's always important to highlight the particular period, historical context. And again, you see, what is distinctive about Africans in the New World is that we had to make ourselves based on our African heritage under modern conditions. And modern conditions have to do with marketplaces in which labor is sold as commodities. It has to do with nation states and ideologies, modern ideologies like nationalism. It has to do with bureaucracies and impersonal rules and regulations that govern behavior based on various elites vis-a-vis those who work in those bureaucracies. All these take on distinctively modern forms. That's one reason why when we talk about jazz, jazz is a thoroughly modern form. It is an African response of making new Africans under modern conditions with European instruments, but Africans playing them. Something distinct, you see. And so the languages that we go back to, those are under very different conditions. We can still build on those. And that's the real challenge, because I do believe, this is where I agree with both Professor Clarke as well as Professor Sante and others, that the African heritage is a fundamental component of New World Africans accepting their humanity and not feeling as if it's something they have to prove to others. As soon as you think you have to prove it to others, you're accepting white supremacist terrain upon which you define yourself. It is a losing battle. Because you already defined the terrain to be a losing one. But at the same time, that definition will take place for young people the latter part of the 20th century, which is postmodern now, the globalization that we talked about before. And it's no accident that young black people have done what? They have created a hip-hop culture, which is a response to the disintegration and decomposition of the black family and black community, so young people will socialize and acculturate themselves by building on the linguistic virtuosity as well as the musical tradition of the past, and they do it by means of what? The most postmodern high-tech technology. Right? They might go back to a Sly or a James Brown or Isley Brother in terms of the rhythm. Right. That's my generation. It would be nice if the younger generation had an Isley Brother. Right. They don't have one. It'd be nice if they had a George Clinton. They don't have one. It'd be nice if they had a Sly. They don't have geniuses like that. Babyface is a genius, but he ain't no Sly. All right, Prince is a genius, but he ain't no Curtis Mayfield. What they lost was this. As the black community and black family underwent disintegration, yes, sir, the networks of apprenticeship that had sustained high levels of musicianship and craftsmanship in the subculture of black musicians also began to decline. And so you ended up with these brilliant little brothers and sisters with very little exposure to music, going to machines, going back to a tradition, but still creating something new. But hip-hop is brand new. That's tremendous breakthrough, but it's under conditions of a decline of apprenticeship for musicianship. It's no accident you got a Wynton Marsalis who is backward looking, because he looks at the decline of musicianship and says, we got to go back to the genius, Louis himself. That's a conservative move. I don't believe jazz ought to be backward looking. I think it ought to be both backward and forward looking, so I got to struggle with Wynton. But I understand he's responding to a hip-hop culture that itself is not exposed to those high levels of apprenticeship that one would have seen in Georgia where Professor Clarke was, in terms of the blues singers coming out of that church and the ways in which they learned how to engage in multi-layered vocalization that would allow an appreciation of a Sarah Vaughan. Ain't no Sarah Vaughan these days. No, sir. Anita's tough, but she ain't Sarah. Everybody know that. And I'm not saying this to put folks down. This is a particular reading of a particular moment in life of a black community which is in partial decline and decomposition. We can bounce back. We've had moments before when this was the case in black music and black culture and so forth. But it depends on what we do.
Yes, sir. And what do we do? I just want to see it because...
Well, one of the things we do is part of that historical continuity that you talked about, that sense of history I was talking about this afternoon, and that Professor Clarke has been alluding to, but in a critical manner that keeps track of the class gender sexual orientation as we go back.
No question. Because
each and every one of those groups in the past has played a fundamental role in contributing to the vitality and health of the black community.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. That's what
ain't no doubt about that. You can't talk about black music in the church and downplay black gay brothers.
Come on.
That's right.
You can't do it. You can act like he might not be. But he is speaking to your soul when he plays that piano. And you don't give a damn what he did that night before.
That's right, brother. That's right.
It's true. It's true.
preach a little bit.
No, I ain't gonna
Don't
say
get
that.
You don't get that tradition.
No, that's true. That's true, brother.
All right, that's all right.
No, it is real, and that's certainly true with the women as well, you know. Very much so. So just a matter, again, I mean, I like what Professor Clarke said when he just said, let's just deal with the reality and not deny what has been and is going on. We can't conceive of black culture without James Baldwin and Auntie Lois. Alexa Hughes, a lady Billie Holiday. You can't conceive of black culture without it. I couldn't be sane without Jimmy Baldwin. You know, I might not kiss the same folk he kissed, but I can't remain sane without his production. Because that's it.
Go ahead.
But I'm sorry, going
But that's good. No. Good to go.
Very often we forget to remember what comes down to us through the historical memory wavelength. Having traveled a great deal in Africa and listened well, I've encountered the origin of the spiritual and the blues being sung in Africa, with Africa not knowing exactly what the hell they were doing.
All right.
I was at a wake in Africa and among the God people, and they were singing the tune of the spiritual certain laws, but the singing in their language. And once I acted like a silly American. Why did you people get that song? Why did you people get that song? Finally, they took me to that king called the God Menchel. He said, you know, Mr. Clarke, according to my information, your people left here about 400 years ago. I said, yes. And according to our tradition, we've been singing this song about 500 years. He looked down his nose and said, now, Mr. Clarke, why did your people get this song? After that, I just listened and tried to understand. I've seen African riverboat captains passing each other, and they would raise a hymn. One would say one verse, one would say the other verse. I've seen men flying in the field in Alabama do the same thing. One they were doing it in African language, the other one was doing it in English language that was forced on it. Years later in Chicago, I had the opportunity to attend a rehearsal with a great blind singer, Ray. And I said that, you know one thing, why they call you the genius, that wine in your singing, that particular flavor, that's the wail, those slave ships coming down through ancestral memory, down through the years, reasserting itself. He shook his head and said, where did this crazy cat come from? I wish I could see him. What I was saying didn't mean a damn thing to him. And yet, the man is a genius.
Oh, yeah.
Anytime a man sings Georgia on my mind, it wants me to make me want to see George. Oh, the hell I call it George. As a people, So many of us are natural geniuses.
That's right.
And don't know it. And so many of us who know it don't know how to declare that to the geniuses. How to preserve the geniuses. Some of the geniuses drank themselves to death. And some of them say yes to every temptation. And if you think if you can say yes to every temptation, why not try an easier thing? Drink up all the water in the sea. It's an impossibility. But if we think we have lost our connection with Africa, and we decry Africa, we have to remember that every time you try to get away from Africa, Africa reaches back and claims you. Through your so-called hybrid culture, I'm using a word that I don't accept. I'm using a word because a lot of you like to believe it. Right. Through your so-called hybrid culture, you think you'll become an American. And nobody wanted you to become an American.
That's right.
You didn't become an American. You didn't want you to be a citizen.
That's right.
Go ahead now.
You think that you're no longer African.
All right now. That's right.
A bigoted white cab driver can put all of you in your proper frame of mind. You don't care whether you're in Africa, whether you're from the Caribbean islands, or whether you're from Africa, or from Georgia. You don't care whether you're AKA or Delta or an L. You ain't gonna pick up none of it. Although he don't like none of you, he think of all of you as what you should be. One people. All Africans and all rejected by him. He has never made culture into a weapon.
That's right.
Yes, sir. And we have a great cultural weapon that we have not used. We don't have to subdue any people. We don't have to enslave any people. Faith has given us a great opportunity because we are not a minority. We should never answer to that name.
Indeed. That's right. That's right.
When you put all of us together in Africa, Caribbean Islands, South America, the Pacific, Africans in India, we number 1 billion people on the face of this earth. Suppose we start an industry based on our numbers. Look at how many people we can put to work. Now suppose Martin Luther King had really followed the Gandhi example.
That's right. That's right.
Gandhi went home and took off all those British tweeds.
Yes, sir.
Started with send his people back to base.
That's what it is.
Back to the spinning wheel.
Yes, sir.
Today, India has one of the largest fabric industries in the world. How about it? We have to go back to basics.
Thank you.
Making our shoes, making our clothes. Loving the things we can do for ourselves.
That's right, brother. That's right.
I proposed one solution that one sister tapped me on the shoulder and told me, this is going to get hell knocked out of you if you keep this up. I suggested, because there's so many brothers and sisters, you know, a little depressed, I suggest we start a hugging brigade. You see a brother and sister down and depressed, grab him, give him a good hug.
I like that.
You see, you might hug the wrong person. Somebody drove back your arm and why did he eat that? But in all honesty now, I'm very glad that Professor West and I had this dialogue. Now, we're never going to completely agree with each other, and that's not significant.
Yeah, that's right.
It's significant that we understand that in a fight for the survival of a people, we're in the same fight.
That's right.
What we will differ is on methodology.
Yeah.
Du Bois and Booker T. Washington had a difference of opinion mainly on methodology. They were not enemies.
That's right.
We're going to find Booker T. Washington's real enemy, that was William Monroe Charles. We're so anxious to referee a fight. We're refereeing a fight that didn't take place. Now, I differ with Professor West, and I differ with the black conservatives because I don't know what they're trying to conserve except that miserable obscurity. But he has a lot of energy we can use, a lot of intellectual hardware we can use. And if you hang out with us long enough, we don't bring him around.
All right.
Good family
Let me say this, though, that one of the wonderful things about Professor John Henrik Clarke is that he has a sense of humanity such that he can be down to earth 1 minute and be encyclopedic the next. And that, for me, is in part what it means to be an African intellectual. And still have a passion to communicate with so-called everyday brothers and sisters.
That's right, brother.
I was talking about Sly Stone this afternoon, Professor Clarke, in terms of everyday people. One of the geniuses of black music is you can listen to a countdown or Giant Steps of a Coltrane, which is the most sophisticated playing on an instrument in the history of the world, but you can be every day and appreciate it. Now, how did Coltrane do that? We don't know, but we know one thing. It had something to do with what Professor Clarke has done. Coltrane used to go to sleep with a horn in his mouth and wake up blowing. That's discipline. That's hard work. And you don't sit and have an encyclopedic mind and still a sense of being down to earth without tremendous sacrifice, discipline, work, and that's what represented Professor John Henrik Clarke. That's the way, in part, why he's an example for so many of us. Very, very much so. He's absolutely right about the disagreement. That black folk are always going to have some disagreements. Partly because human beings have disagreements, but secondly because there's always a sense in which we want to move in improvisational ways such that we don't just produce sameness all the time. And the question becomes, do we keep the focus on something bigger than us? Because the freedom movement was in place before Professor Clarke and myself came along. We just decided we wanted to be a part of it in our own way, and it's going to be around long after we are gone. We're talking about something much bigger and grander than us. And it's true that I find it hard to envision ever giving up on my own Christian faith and on my own radical democracy. Not conservatism, but radical democracy. But I see such genuine overlap with nationalists who keep the focus where it belongs, on black suffering. That's the starting point. That's what I love about black nationalists of all stripes. Even as we struggle with gender and class and sexual orientation and so on. And last but not least, I hope that we don't overlook the degree to which just getting to know one another on a personal basis that serves as a way of respecting one another is noted. Because a lot of times through the press, through the mainstream electronic and print media, we often feel as if we have to communicate that way rather than sit down and break bread with one another and get to know one another. Now, we didn't have to do that with Professor Clarke and myself because I told you I stood at his feet, 1975. That's 20 years ago. 20 years ago when he was leading the seminar with Charles Hamilton and a whole host of others there at Columbia. But especially for the young people, the people you think you disagree with and have different ideological orientations and struggling over black womanism and so forth, just sit down and get to know one another. You find that there's a whole slew of possibilities of overlap. Because in the end, I think Professor Clarke is absolutely right, that if reactionary forces completely take over and quarantine us all, we all going under together anyway. Right. And on the other hand, if we're able to triumph, we all going to celebrate together.
That's right, brother.
See? And that's what keeping one's eye on the prize is all about for me. So I want to thank you all here at Ohio State University, and I pay homage to this giant, this towering figure, this genius that he is, Professor John Henrik Clarke.
Just a couple of quick announcements. Well, one thing, the plaque that Dr. Clarke received, we tried to give him one in 1992 when he came and dedicated the Fonzo Schomburg Research Room, but we had his name misspelled. Henrik was misspelled. Of course, he took the name Henrik in recognition of the social protest literature of Henrik Ibsen. So we ceded those traditions next to it. But we got it right this time, and it was symbolic of the fact that one of Dr. Clarke's famous quotations is, of course, history is a clock, by which we tell our special time of day. It tells us where we have been, tells us who we are, and most importantly, it tells us where we must go and who we must be. Dr. West, on behalf of the Africans assembled here, I thank you. My nationalism will certainly has been and will continue to be very well informed by your excellent critique. I want to give you this copy of the New Republic. In case y'all haven't seen it, it just came out. This is a family discussion here. This man, Leon Wiesenthal, The Decline of the Black Intellectual, attacks Dr. West in a way that I haven't even seen Malati Asante or John Henrik Clarke, even when Skip Gates called him the grand patriarch of the Nile Valley School. That wasn't as vicious an attack as the people who paid Skip Gates to write for the New York Times have made on you. And I'm gonna give you this because, you know, I forget the photocopy. I want you to have it because I want you to read that. Aya Mubarak is gonna come up and make an announcement about the leadership symposium, but these two Africans here stand for all of us, and certainly to be Bell Hooks and you have Patricia Williams or Marimba Ani. We don't want to leave the sisters out, because we gotta have that Ma'ati balance. I don't see that in the West. That's African. I gotta speak for Ma'ati. So if you wanna come on up, thank you, brothers, really, and thank you, Larry, Cultural Center, for this family discussion.
Just wanted to remind you about the African American Leadership Symposium tomorrow. Some of the presentations, some of the presentations by our speakers tomorrow, I'm just going to give you the titles real quickly, and we're not going to tell you what time they're going to speak. They have to come and experience everything. But some of the titles here, we have Declarations of Independence on Protest, Community, and the Roots of Selling Out. We have Challenges of Leadership in the 20th Century. We have instructions to young scribes, how to go about fighting for our liberation now. So if you're really about, if we're all really about scholarship, but I see for some of us, this dialogue got too deep and we packed our bags and left. If we're really about scholarship, we need to come here tomorrow between 9:30 and 5 p.m. and let's just really talk about things, and we can go more into depth if we need to about the things that our brothers have talked about today. So see you tomorrow in here at 9:30.
We're getting ready to have a reception. Okay, you want to announce the ball? Hurry up. You gotta get ready to.
I just want you to announce the Office of African American Student Services. Remember, Bajo is tomorrow night. Starts at 9 p.m. It's $8 at the door. That's $8 for 2 people. Any 2 people is $8. $5 single. It's going to be food and dancing, and Shalomba's going to be the DJ. See you there.
Okay, thank you so much. We want to thank the people that made it possible so everybody knows about the tapes. We will not be selling any tapes, whether they be audio or video. Tapes will be here at the Hale Center, in which you can always come and view them. But we will not be selling any tapes. We do have it for archive purposes. We also want to thank all the people that made this possible with SAPSA, thanks, OBSA, Western Center for the Arts, the OSU Department of Black Studies, University Honors Center, Residence Hall Advisory Council, the Office of Minority Affairs, Office of Research, Office of Academic Affairs, Department of Black Studies, College of Humanities, Center for African Studies, the Graduate School, Action, and the Frank W. Black Culture Center. And that will conclude our program. And there is food in the Elijah Pierce Gallery to your right. Thank you so much for coming.